During a heated live interview, Piers Morgan came prepared to challenge and confront Ibrahim Traoré. But what no one expected was how Traoré disarmed the moment with just one calm, heartfelt sentence. The audience was stunned. Piers was left speechless, and viewers across the world found themselves moved to tears by the truth and grace of his words. The studio was buzzing. Piers Morgan sat at his desk, flipping through notes, his usual scowl fixed on his face. Tonight's guest was Ibrahim Traoré, the young, unflinching president of the transition of Burkina Faso. Piers thrived on confrontation. This wasn't going to be a polite conversation. The cameras blinked red. The producer counted down. 3, 2, 1. Tonight, Piers began, his voice sharp. We're joined by a man who's become a controversial figure on the world stage. Some call him a hero. Others say he's reckless. President Ibrahim Traoré, welcome. Traoré nodded softly, wearing the same calm. That unsettled his enemies more than anger ever could. Without waiting, Piers leaned in. You've made decisions that have cost lives. Some say you're playing with fire. Do you feel no guilt at all? Or do you just hide it? But the air in the studio tightened. Traoré didn't flinch. He looked directly at Piers and simply said, "Do you really want to know?" Even Piers faltered at the weight of that quiet question. Viewers at home leaned closer to their screens. Something in Traoré's eyes promised an answer no one was ready for. The silence stretched longer than anyone expected. Piers cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "Yes," he said finally, a little too defensive. "I want to know." "Don't tell me you've got nothing to regret, Mr. President. Everyone does." Traoré folded his hands. His eyes didn't leave Piers. He exhaled slowly. "My regret," he began, "is not what you think it is." The words were soft, but somehow cut through the air like a blade. Piers raised his eyebrows, waiting as though daring him to continue. Across the world, people were glued to their TVs and phones, feeling the tension. Traoré's expression shifted. Not angry, not cold, just deeply human. "My regret," he said again, voice cracking ever so slightly, "is that there are still children who look at me as though I failed to protect them." The studio went still. Piers next. Question froze in his throat. On social media, clips of the moment already started spreading. Children who look at me as though I've failed them. For the first time that night, Piers's face softened and Traoré looked almost like he was about to cry himself. The next question never came. Instead, Piers lowered his pen and leaned back slightly, as if unsure how to proceed, but Traoré kept speaking. His tone was quiet, but his words echoed through the studio. "I see their faces every night," he said, "at refugee camps, on streets scarred by war, children with hollow eyes asking why we let this happen to them. I have no answer. Good enough for them? Not yet." A hush fell over the room. Even the crew in the back stopped moving. Piers's usual fire was gone. Instead, he looked at Traoré as though seeing him for the first time. How do you carry that?" Piers finally whispered. Traoré closed his eyes for a second, then opened them again, wet but steady. "Because if I don't carry it," he said, "who will?" Candace Owens, sitting quietly off camera as a guest analyst, was caught on a close-up shot. She bit her lip, visibly fighting back tears. It was the first time viewers saw her vulnerable. She whispered, barely audible over her mic. "Never heard this before? Millions watching at home felt the same?" The questions got harsher. Piers was in his element now, leaning forward, jabbing his finger in the air as he spoke. "You talked about sacrifice, Mr. Traoré," Piers said, his voice rising. "But Burkina Faso's economy is struggling. You've banned foreign military presence. You've cut ties with powerful allies. Some say you've doomed your people just to make a point. Do you care about them at all, or is this about your ego?" The crowd in the studio stirred uncomfortably. Even Traoré's translator looked tense. But Traoré didn't blink. He stared back at Piers, calm as a lake at dawn. Most for a moment it looked like he might not answer at all. And then softly he said, "Do you think I sleep through the sound of children?" Crying, the words dropped like a stone in water. Piers froze mid-breath. Even viewers at home felt it. The quiet was deafening. Traoré straightened his jacket slightly as though preparing himself for what was next. The tension hung in the air, heavier now. This was no longer just an interview. It was turning into something no one watching could look away from. The camera zoomed in on his face as he continued. His voice stayed low but unshakable. I stood one morning outside a burned-out school. Traoré began. There was a little girl, no more than 6 years old. She was clutching her brother's hand. He was already gone, but she didn't know it yet. She just kept saying, "He's sleeping. He's sleeping." He paused. The studio went completely still. She looked up at me. He went on, his own eyes glistening now, and asked if I could wake him up, and I couldn't. I couldn't. A quiet gasp came from the audience. Even Piers didn't interrupt this time. "I carry your eyes with me every day," Traoré said. "I carry the eyes of every child who's asked me to fix something I can't fix yet, and that's why I keep fighting. Not because of ego, but because I don't want to see another little girl begging me to wake up her brother." Piers's face softened just slightly. His pen rested motionless on the desk. No one had expected this, least of all him. For the first time in his career, Piers Morgan didn't know what to say. The words caught in his throat. He looked at Traoré, and then down at his own notes, which now felt small, petty. The cameras kept rolling, and Ibrahim Traoré just sat there, his gaze steady, his hands folded, waiting. The audience erupted, not in applause, but in tears. People wiped their eyes, silently, unable to look away. On social media, clips of that one sentence, "Do you think I sleep through the sound of children crying?" were already going viral. Comment sections filled with hearts, tears, and words like, "This man is a real leader. I never knew his story before. Now I can't stop crying." Even Piers, who prided himself on his composure, had to clear his throat to speak again. When he did, his voice was softer. "How do you keep going?" he asked, "when the weight of it all must feel impossible?" Traoré just looked at him, a faint, tired smile on his face, and what he said next would leave everyone watching shattered. The question Piers asked next was sharp. Why not step aside if the cost is so high? To keep yourself and your people. Through all this pain, the words hung in the air. The cameras panned to Traoré. He was silent for so long that the audience started to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Even Piers began to frown, as if expecting Traoré to deflect or dodge the question. Finally, Traoré exhaled and said quietly, "Because my people never got to step aside." The room froze. He continued. "When terrorists came into their homes, they didn't get to choose. When their fields burned, they didn't get to choose. When their children starved, they didn't get to choose. So why should I?" The audience started to murmur. One woman in the front row put a hand to her mouth, already crying. Even Piers didn't respond at first. Somehow, Traoré's calm voice made it even heavier. The studio lights seemed to dim. All you could hear was breathing. And people watching at home began reaching for tissues. As the cameras rolled, Traoré reached into his breast pocket. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This," he said, holding it up, "is why I don't quit." The audience leaned in. Piers leaned in. "It's from a mother," Traoré explained. "A woman I met last month after her son was killed protecting his village. She gave me this letter." He unfolded it with care, his hand steady despite the weight of his words. She wrote. He began reading aloud. "President Traoré, if you must fall, fall forward, so that even as you fall, we know someone was fighting for us." He paused, looking down at the paper. Then he looked straight at Piers, his voice barely above a whisper. "Out. How do I tell her son that? I quit." Piers swallowed hard, his pen slipping from his fingers onto the desk. For the first time in his career, his sharp, combative face softened completely. At home, countless viewers wiped away tears. The comments online flooded in. "I've never cried watching an interview before. He's speaking for all of us." Piers cleared his throat, but his voice cracked anyway. "You talk about children," he said, struggling to maintain composure, "and mothers and sacrifices. But what about you, Mr. Traoré? What have you sacrificed?" The question seemed to catch even Traoré off guard for a moment. His eyes dropped to the floor, and when he looked back up, something had shifted in his expression. "I've sacrificed myself," he said simply. The words hit like a punch, he explained. "My family rarely sees me. My own mother fears for my life every day. I have lost friends. I have lost sleep. And sometimes I think I have even lost myself." The tears glimmered in his eyes now, but he didn't look away. The studio audience could barely breathe. Piers sat back in his chair, visibly shaken. His lips trembled. As he whispered almost to himself, "I've never heard this before." Those 6 words echoed through the studio like a bell. Even the producers behind the cameras stood frozen, and millions of viewers around the world felt their hearts crack wide open. The cameras kept rolling, but no one in the studio was moving anymore. Even the makeup artist in the corner had stopped, clutching a tissue to her cheek. Ibrahim Traoré's words hung in the air like a prayer. "I've sacrificed myself," he'd said. And now the silence said more than anything. Piers looked at him differently now. His usual fire was gone, replaced with something softer, something almost like respect. He leaned forward, speaking more gently this time. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. Traoré took a long breath, his shoulders heavy. "I regret that they still suffer," he said. "I regret that I haven't done enough yet, but I cannot regret standing here, because if I leave, who will they have?" The audience was wiping their eyes now. Even the cameraman's hands were shaking slightly. For the first time in his career, Piers didn't interrupt. And at home, millions of viewers clutched their hearts, realizing they were witnessing something much bigger than politics. From the back row of the studio, someone whispered loud enough to be heard, "He's telling the truth."
It wasn't clear who said it.
But it didn't matter because that single quiet sentence seemed to break a dam. The audience stirred. People murmured in agreement, some nodding through their tears. Traoré's eyes scanned the room. He noticed a young woman in the second row, her cheeks stirred with mascara as she cried quietly into her sleeve. Piers caught this, too, and for the first time that night, he broke his role as host. He turned to the audience and asked, "What do you see when you look at him?" The man stood up, his voice trembling. "I see someone who cares more about strangers than our own. Politicians care about us," he said. The crowd murmured louder now. Traoré stayed quiet, his hands folded in his lap, letting their voices fill the space. One by one, more people spoke up, calling him a hero, calling him hope. And Piers just sat there, his eyes glistening, struggling to keep his composure. The final question came quietly. Not from Piers, not from the audience, but from the director through Piers's earpiece. "We're out of time," the director said. "Wrap it up." But Piers didn't move. He stared at Traoré for a long, silent moment. Then he asked, "What would you say if the whole world was listening right now?" The audience held its breath. The camera zoomed in on Traoré's face. He looked straight into the lens and spoke, calm, heartfelt, unshakable. "The people you ignore today are the people who will bury your children tomorrow. So choose love. Choose them. Choose humanity before it's too late." The room went silent. You could hear a pin drop. Piers blinked rapidly, but no words came. His throat tightened. He just nodded slowly, almost defeated, but deeply moved. The clip hit the internet within minutes, and by the end of the night, it was everywhere. The sentence that shook the world. The headlines read, "At home, people watched through tears, realizing they'd just witnessed history, and they couldn't stop watching." The studio lights dimmed as the show wrapped. But outside, the world was already on fire. Clips of IbrahimTraoré.com, piercing words flooded social media within minutes. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, everywhere you looked. Hashtags like non-truth over politics and Ton Traoré speaks trended at #1. People from every corner of the globe reposted his words. "The people you ignore today are the people who will bury your children tomorrow. So choose love. Choose them. Choose humanity before it's too late." Piers stayed behind in the studio, still in shock. The man who usually devoured his guests had nothing left to say. He just sat in his chair staring at his hands. Producers rushed around, phones ringing constantly. The audience filed out silently, many wiping their eyes. Meanwhile, Traoré quietly walked out the back door of the studio into the cool London night. And already, strangers on the street stopped him. One woman clutched his hand and whispered, "Thank you. I'll never forget tonight." He only smiled softly and kept walking. But inside, even he was beginning to realize he had just sparked something much bigger than himself. That same night, back in Burkina Faso, the streets were alive with joy and pride. Families crowded around radios and televisions, watching clips of their president's words. People cried openly, hugging each other. Even children ran through the streets shouting his name. "He spoke for us," they yelled. He told them the truth. At his home in Ouagadougou, Traoré's mother watched the clip on a small television set. Tears rolled silently down her face as she whispered a prayer for him. She picked up her phone and sent him a short message. "My son, you've carried our pain into the light. Be strong. We are with you." In his London hotel room, Traoré read her text. Alone, for the first time that day, his calm expression cracked. He pressed his forehead into his hands and let himself cry quietly. For all the people he couldn't save yet, and for all the mothers still waiting for their sons to come home, for all the children sleeping hungry tonight, and for a fleeting second, he wondered if it was enough. But then he stood, wiped his eyes, and prepared himself. Tomorrow, the world would still be watching. The next morning, Ibrahim Traoré was already dressed and ready to leave his hotel when his phone rang. It was Piers Morgan. His voice was softer now, different. "Ibrahim," he began awkwardly. I just wanted to say thank you." There was a long pause. "You didn't just speak to me last night," Piers continued, his voice cracking slightly. "You spoke to everyone, and I'd like you to come back. There are more things I think the world needs to hear from you." Traoré stayed quiet for a moment before replying, "Thank you, Piers," he said gently. "I'll come back, but only if you're ready to hear, not just to ask." The line was silent, but Piers finally answered, "I'm ready." When Traoré hung up, he stood by the hotel window and looked out over the bustling city below. Even though the sky was gray, the streets were alive with movement. People rushing, children laughing, strangers brushing past one another. But for the first time in a long time, he felt hope. Not for himself, but for all of them. The next evening, Traoré returned to the studio for a follow-up segment. Outside, a crowd had already gathered, waiting in the rain just to catch a glimpse of him. Some held signs. "You speak for us. Truth still matters." "Thank you, Ibrahim." Piers met him at the door this time. Not as a challenger, but almost like a friend. His eyes looked tired, but there was something softer in them now. As they walked down the corridor to the studio, Traoré glanced at the cameras, the lights, the waiting audience. He knew what he was about to say would matter. Not just tonight, but long after. He paused at the door and took a breath. In his mind, he saw the faces of his people. Farmers working dry earth, children with wide, hungry eyes, mothers holding their breath for their sons to return from war. When the door opened and he stepped under the blinding lights again, the room fell silent. This was no longer just an interview. This was a reckoning. The segment began. Piers leaned forward, voice trembling slightly. "You spoke last time about humanity, but tell me, Mr. Traoré, why does it matter if the world listens? People don't change." There was a long, heavy silence. The audience waited. Traoré's hands rested calmly on his lap. He didn't rush. Finally, he looked directly at Piers and spoke. His voice was soft because even if they don't change, you can. Piers froze, his mouth open. The words sank in like stones dropped into deep water. In the audience, someone gasped quietly. A young woman wiped tears from her cheek. Way continued, "Change doesn't start with the world. It starts with you, one heart at a time." The silence that followed was deafening. Piers lowered his gaze, speechless, and across the world. Millions of viewers watching in their kitchens, on their phones, in their living rooms, sat with tears streaming down their faces, clutching their chests. In that single moment, politics faded. Humanity stood bare. When the cameras stopped rolling, the applause didn't. People stood. Many cried. Some reached out just to shake his hand. Piers approached him, his voice breaking. "Thank you, Ibrahim. I'll never forget this." Trey smiled faintly and replied, "It's not about me, Piers. It's about what you do next." That night, as he left the studio, the rain had stopped. The air felt clean, hopeful. The same crowd from earlier was still there, waiting, cheering. Waved to them, his heart full. He knew he couldn't fix everything in a day or a week, but he had planted a seed, one that might grow even in the hardest ground. And maybe, just maybe, the world was ready to water it. If this story moved you, touched your heart, or even brought tears to your eyes, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and leave a comment below about the part that touched you most. Let's share this moment of humanity together and keep the conversation alive. Truth over politics,